Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Found in Translation, your home for Latino politics. We're excited to be back after a few weeks away, and I am happy, so happy, to welcome back Rafael Collazo, my partner in crime, back to the program. I want to take a minute to welcome Rafael back and tell him that we missed him. Rafael, it's great to have you back, and so glad that you're doing better and in better health.
Well, thank you, Enrique, and I want to thank, really, numerous people in the Found Translation community for sending their well wishes. I have had a health issue that I've been dealing with the last few months. I'm well on the road to recovery, in no large small part because of the support, prayers, well wishes, and support that I've gotten from the Found Translation community and our activist community around the country. Enrique, I had rosaries from Phoenix to the Brooklyn and everywhere in between, and really appreciate everybody's support. I'm still on the road to recovery. I'm not 100%, but seguimos pa'lante, and there's a lot of talk about. And in future other episodes and other content platforms, we'll get more into the details of my health situation. But today, there's lots to talk about when it comes to Latinos and politics.
Absolutely. And Rafael, it's so good to have you back. So good to have your voice once again, and we were really excited to be having this conversation again today, even given that we were off for a few weeks. But before we get started this morning, I need to remind our viewers that the views expressed on the Found in Translation podcast by its hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect the view of any of the affiliate organizations. All right, so let's get right to it, Rafael. January 6th, we got a lot to cover, and I think this is first and foremost to talk about. Um, I know you've been watching along with the other 20 million Americans, right? The first couple of hearings and another hearing happening here today, as a matter of fact. They've been very eye-opening, in many ways surprising. Day one featured the committee using testimony from members of the Trump administration to essentially argue that the former president was behind a coordinated conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election and block the transfer of power to Joe Biden. I thought the committee also did a good job of providing evidence that Trump really did nothing to stop the Capitol attack, even expressing approval, right, as this was unfolding. Day two hearing focused on Trump's false election fraud claims, again, that he continues to peddle even today. But I thought what was really critical was Trump's former campaign manager, Bill Stepien, his former attorney general, other folks in the Trump orbit, including his daughter, that they told him that the claims of election fraud were false. So anyway, that's a lot to unpack there. We could really dedicate an entire podcast to these hearings. But Rafael, what did you think about the hearings and the committee laying out the case for a criminal referral of the former president?
Well, before I get into the details of the hearing, which I think even for activists and people from our perspective, Enrique, have been surprisingly effective, surprisingly interesting, provocative, informative, because if you follow politics like we do, we pretty much know most of it, right? Or all of it. A lot of eye-opening, relevant revelations. But I just want to take a step back, and I think I said this, and I'm going to keep saying it on the show, is that the most fundamental thing we have to fight for is our democracy. Because if you don't have a democracy, you don't have not only personal freedoms and civil liberties, and that would particularly impact people of color in the Latino community, but you don't have the economic freedom or the creative freedom to express yourself the way that is the reasons we love this country and so many in so large respect, and why our immigrant brothers and sisters come to this country for those freedoms. So we will have to do everything we can to protect our democracy. So that's why it's critically important that the January 6th committee takes place, lays out the facts in a very deliberative way for all of us to make our own judgments and decisions about how we feel about what took place, and that we put front and center our democracy. So that being said, in terms of the committee hearings, you laid it out a lot of the highlights very well, Enrique. We learned a lot. I know personally, I didn't really understand the level of coordination as it related to the surges on the Capitol. The fact that the Proud Boys, for example, didn't even go to the Trump rally. We're attacking essentially the Capitol building in that initial wave in mid-morning. The coordination between the various white supremacist / far right ring groups that was taking place that was laid out in the first hearing, from the documentarians footage of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, sort of coordinating efforts in those days. The more recent video that's been released, and we had rumors of this. We had Congresswoman Cheryl raising these concerns, but Congressman Loudermilk, the Republican congressman from Georgia, literally giving, helping rioters, case the congressional hallways out the day before, in a way that's very, like cat burglar kind of stuff. And so there's just so much to unpack. I think one of the things that was probably the most shocking to me, just in terms of the visuals, and I want to get your take on a second, Enrique, around from your communications perspective, how do you think the hearings have been received and been presented to the country? But that, and I don't want to be flip about this, because the two pieces that were so shocking visually was, the additional footage of how the cops got attacked. We had seen some of those footage, but to see that young female get, concussed and attacked, and then subsequently her testimony that first day, and just the brutality of these rioters against the police was stunning. The other part was, and again, I don't want to sound flip about it, I've just never seen cops act like that. When in interactions I see with cops, you put your hands on them, that's the end of the show. Right. And if there's a group of you that are looking threatening and are physically attacking with weapons, maybe not guns, but weapons.
Absolutely.
Guns are coming out, and it's going to end very quickly. So I think there's also a level of, we have to understand as a country that, not that I'm not blaming the police, and obviously they were woefully unprepared. And obviously on some level, there was some leadership in the police apparatus that were sympathetic to Trump's cause because of the lax, preparation for January 6th. Everyone knew something was going to go down. He was announcing it.
Well, and they even arrested police outside, right? I mean, there were police officers from other cities that went on their own time, right? That's right. Subsequently go back home, find out they're there. So yes, to your point, we know that was the case.
So I think we have to, even beyond kind of the democratic fight that we're having here for voting rights and our civil liberties, we have to see this as an example of, the inequities in the cracks in our system, because it should have never gotten that far that day, even regardless of their coordination. And I think I'm even learning, and I'm just how much, how aware, not that we didn't know this, but how aware Trump was, and he was getting real-time feedback around how, this attempt to overturn the election was folly. There was no evidence. I mean, Attorney General Barr's testimony was incredibly damning, and the level of coordination with these far-right groups. I was even surprised the level of detail. I mean, there's documents that were released this morning with plans about how to, occupy, all the different various congressional buildings on the campus. So just eye-opening. And what I wanted to ask you, Enrique, was, as a communications specialist, I think we're all on our side. I think we're all kind of surprised how well the Democrats and the committee has done presenting this information. It got baffle ratings in prime time. So from your perspective, from a media perspective, someone that's worked with members of Congress, White House, the administration, previous administrations, how do you think the Select Committee has done in presenting and essentially marketing the evidence?
Yeah, I think they've done a great job. I think the folks who have done the questioning on the committee, obviously you can tell that they've rehearsed it, which I think is good, right? If you're going to be on primetime television, you don't want it to look like you're asking questions on the fly. Not that they would ever do that, of course, when you're a member of a congressional committee, right? Your staff, prepares you and does a good job. A lot was said that they hired a former producer, I believe, from ABC, to help them, make this a little bit more primetime ready. And I think it shows. They've received some criticism for that, but I think at the end of the day, there's too much at stake for them not to be able to show effectively from a communications perspective what happened. I think the mix of using video, video testimony, along with video, as you alluded to earlier, Rafael, of the riot, painted a picture, and that's what you need to do on television. You need to paint a picture. I think they've done a great job. Selfishly, I wish they would have been able to do this a lot sooner, given everything that's hanging in the balance with Congress right now. I mean, how far will this go? And we know if Republicans get in office, they've already said not only are they going to disband this committee, but they are going to investigate the January 6th committee. So, from that perspective, purely from a communications perspective, I think they've done a great job. And they've even been very active on social media, releasing video on Twitter as well. Video evidence is recapping what they've done. So overall, I thought they've done a very, very good job, and it's been very effective.
What I want to do now, Enrique, is I want to show a couple highlights from day one. And also, we got to give a little love to, I never thought I'd say this, to give props to a Cheney in politics, but Senator Liz Cheney not only has been very brave. I mean, she's going to lose her Senate race in Wyoming. I mean, she's essentially sacrificing her seat in the Senate over this, standing up to our democracy, standing up to the scourge of Trump and MAGAism. But she's also been excellent, just sort of theatrically presenting the information and really give a very compelling case from one of America's the conservative families in this country, the Cheneys, former Vice President Cheney, of course, who probably was the mastermind behind the White House for many years. So let's show this clip, and I want to get your feedback, Enrique, about from a communications perspective, how this is played out in the media.
Attorney General Barr also told President Trump that his allegations about Dominion voting machines were groundless.
I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on it.
Enrique, Attorney General Barr basically protected President Trump throughout the initial the evidence related to interference in foreign affairs and pressuring foreign leaders, President Zelensky, ironically enough, as it related to his presidential, his reelection aspirations, and obviously the so much that Robert Mueller uncovered as it related to conspiracies that ultimately he didn't have the guts to pursue vociferously, and Barr basically protected President Trump. But when you see Bill Barr, one of America's great villains over the last few years in our politics, Enrique, throw President Trump under the bus and the whole MAGA movement under the bus, how do you think that resonated with the public? And I guess the question is it going to make a difference, Enrique?
Yeah, it's interesting because many folks are saying, why didn't he say this before? When you knew this was all going on, why wait until this happened? It seems as though when he felt, to me personally, I think he thought, if I go along with this crazy scheme, I myself, right, will not only lose all credibility, but I could be criminally indicted and I will have to face charges, right? So obviously, how bad it is if Bill Barr comes out against President Trump, as you said, right? He was his sycophant. I mean, he was his defender, so it must have been really bad. And we're seeing that it was for Bill Barr to even say, you know what, I'm washing my hands of this and I'm done. I do think it will make a difference. Obviously, he is persona non grata now with the MAGA crowd, along with all those other folks who have come out against President Trump. And again, I think it was effective from a communications perspective. These were all Republicans. These were all people in Trump's orbit. You have not heard from one Democrat under oath or on video.
Some of them are opposing Senator Cheney in her race.
That's
Senator
right.
Cheney in her race.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll see how it goes, but I think it's been very effective. I hope, at the end of the day, right, Chairman Thompson said, it's up to the Department of Justice to bring charges,
Yes.
and I think pressure now is growing on the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to do something. I think there's a lot of folks who want to see some sort of accountability, because what's going to happen, Rafael? I mean, you and I, we know there's no way in hell that anyone that we know could go storm the Capitol, let alone take on a police force and do these kinds of things without facing consequences. Here we are, here we witnessed in real time, people trying to overthrow the government. And if there are no consequences, I think it's only going to embolden folks who believe that this could be, this is the norm. We'll get a slap on the wrist, and then business as usual. Someone has to pay the price.
Yeah, no, and the one thing also I wanted to mention is that props to the committee for being brave enough to make clear the linkage between the big lie and the big ripoff as it relates to what was the real purpose of fomenting this lie. Well, it was actually to raise a bunch of money for some, Democratic, democracy fund that actually just went, to the pockets of Trump and his minions. And the accountability has to be there. And the accountability, and, Merrick Garland, look, I mean, doesn't appear to be the most courageous guy in the world. But we just hope that he just does the right thing. And I think he should follow the committee's lead, lay out the facts, let them go where they may. Don't politicize it. Don't take in political considerations. Do the right thing. And no one is above the law. So when we come back, Enrique, we want to talk about, the Uvalde situation. Those families deserve our continued monitoring of what's going on in Uvalde, and gun control legislation is moving in Congress. So we'll be right back. I want to hear from a great friend of the show, Luis Suave Gonzalez, one of the nation's foremost activists as it relates to juvenile justice and criminal justice reform. Suave Gonzalez is actually along with Marina Hossa, just won a Pulitzer Prize for his podcast, the Suave Podcast. So great friend of mine from North Philly. We'll be back after hearing from Maria and Luis with more from Found in Translation.
My bad. She messed my hide up, right? Because I was high on marijuana. So I was like, she just messed my hide up. And I just felt that every word that came out of her mouth, she was directing it at me. So when she was done, I asked her, like, yo, what can I do? I'm doing life. I'm from New York, and she said, you could be my source, which I didn't even understand what source meant at the time. But then she said, you could be the voice for the voiceless. And that's what clicked.
So Maria,
that's what got me interested. And that's what ultimately made me change my way of thinking in my life.
Suave is the truth, and we'll have him back on the show. He's a great friend, and every time I turn around, he's getting another award. Awards, and I think there's a Netflix documentary or a reality show brewing. I shouldn't have said that, but anyway, he's got a lot going on there, brother. Yeah. And I wish him all the best. It's just an incredible story of redemption.
Absolutely. People in high places, Rafael. I tell everybody, when I come back, I want to be Rafael Collazo.
It's unless you're in my back pocket, how would you know? It happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as you said really quickly, or before the break, we want to talk about Uvalde. What a heart-wrenching and unfathomable situation. We haven't had a chance really to discuss this, obviously, since we've been off the last couple of weeks. The shooting happened on May 24th, so it's been a few weeks now. So much has unfolded since this tragedy and the timeline of events that led up to the shooting, and of course, what did and didn't happen during the shooting. We know that parents were pleading with officers outside to go in. We know that some parents were restrained by officers that were trying to go in and save their children. We know that Angeli Gomez, what a brave person, right? A mother who ran inside, saved her children despite the threats of being arrested. We know that police did not engage the shooter outside of the school, as originally stated by Governor Abbott. We know that the police waited for over an hour inside the school before engaging the shooter. So, Rafael, what are your thoughts on this tragedy, and do you feel that Congress will finally get something done around gun control?
Well, the first thing is we can't measure the toll the latest tragedy, and I don't want to forget Buffalo go on and on. We lost 3 young people in Philadelphia a few weekends ago, incredibly tragically, and unfortunately, the tragedies occur every day. But that particular incident in Uvalde, I think, particularly the Latino community, I think around the country, though, really took an incredible and still takes we're all experiencing trauma from what took place. And part of that reason is that, you couldn't have had a group of more innocent people. I mean, obviously small children getting mutilated. I mean, it's just unfathomable. The two teachers. I mean, Enrique, we know two women that are friends and coworkers in every Latino network of family, that are nice and do the right thing and work hard and are family oriented. And of course, subsequently, the husband of one of them passed away out of grief shortly thereafter. So the whole thing was just tragic. And I think we're all still dealing with this tragedy emotionally. But then quickly we turn to how do we support these families and how do we take a bigger look around? How do we support communities like Uvalde? Uvalde is a relatively small town, 30,000 people, if that. Half the city budget, town budget, when I say city, town budget goes to law enforcement. And they didn't have the resources to open the door. And so that was essential.
They didn't have the key.
They didn't have the key. Oh, and the door was too strong. Well, I mean, half your city budget, you should have the resources to open doors. And I know that the school police sheriff, Pete Arredondo, who was MIA, and I know he's feeling the heat. And we've all, I think, on some level, taken out our angst on him about what happened and family members. And there's just lots of things that need to be resolved here. But his basic theory is that, that's basically his excuse for why there was this, excruciating 40-minute plus lapse between the initial call and actually getting to the killer. This also falls in the context of the immigration conversation, Enrique, because one of the dynamics that the local community gave us feedback to, and did it very clearly in the media, is that, we feel like a police state here. Like half our city budget goes to crime and safety, the police.
Yeah.
And then we have this other layer of law enforcement from customs and enforcement. That is, as the Atlantic Monthly article stated, is not part of the community, is the community, because such a large percentage of the resources to the town, the employment goes to enforcing immigration in this town that's 3 hours from the border. So there's this lack of power that I think a lot of Latinos feel in that community, in that, so much of our precious resources go to this, and in our moment of need, this is what happened. And we need to do everything we can to continue to support these families, because there's nothing more tragic.
Absolutely. We're both fathers. We both have children. I couldn't imagine losing a child, much less in this kind of in this kind of fashion. I don't know how some of these parents are getting through this tragedy. I just can't imagine what it would be like to have to bury a child, and then to hear that, testimony, right, from the young lady who survived, the 11-year-old who talked about smearing blood on her to save her own life, and had the bravery to also call 911, right? I'm still trying to figure out all of this and how these people are doing it. You go about your daily life and everything else, right? I just celebrated my youngest daughter's 8th grade graduation, and what a beautiful time, right, to celebrate her accomplishments. But in the back of my mind, you're also thinking about those families, right, who were just days away from summer vacation, days away from being out for the summer. And these are babies. These are babies. And when you see their faces, I mean, these are young kids that look like the kids that my sons and daughters go to school with. They look like kids from the barrio that I grew up in, right?
Oh my God.
And it's so sad. Beautiful young people that are gone. To your point, we just got to continue to wrap these folks in love, continue to support them. But to your point around immigration, and this police state, things are still moving at a snail's pace with this administration around any kind of, immigration reform. Not that this would have stopped this young man who obviously had issues, right? I mean, we need gun reform. I mean, hopefully, whatever Chris Murphy and the bipartisan group of folks, they can make this happen. But there's so much intertwined in this story, right? And the mental health component of it as well, funding for that. What does that look like? But we still need, and we just celebrated yesterday DACA's 10th year anniversary, which is great. But to me, it's also sad. 10 years later, and we're still celebrating.
And it's so interesting you bring that up, because so much of the argument for increased funding for local police in Texas, border enforcement, Greg Abbott shamefully sending, sending the state,
Right.
Down to the border, wasting money, wasting time.
Yeah.
And with this argument, basically, that immigrants are dangerous. I mean, that's basically the undertone, and brown immigrants specifically, because Ukrainians are coming in, it's no problem.
Right.
And the irony is that 10 years with DACA recipients being here temporarily and in a very, fragile state, but still allowed to be here, all they're doing is contributing to our country. And in a way that shows that, that this is their home, and we are home, and we're here to stay. The last thing I want to say before we take a break and bring on our very special guest, Fernand Amandi, is that, as it relates to gun reform, there was, after the incident, a lot of friends were throwing up their hands metaphorically on social media. Well, that's hopeless. We'll never be able to do anything about this. We're in such a tailspin as a country. Our elected officials can't get it together. They don't want to change anything. And one of the things that I wanted to share with our found translation community is two things. One is we can't give up, if anything, for those families and those kids. And for Parkland and for Buffalo and for the list goes on and on. We can't, those children didn't die. Sandy Hook, those children didn't die in vain. So we can't give up. And the second thing is, what feels like hopeless now or like a insignificant activity now bears fruit. We wouldn't be this close to passing, again, in a very initial bipartisan package around gun reform. It doesn't go nearly as far as I know you and I would like, but it will save lives, and it will be a step forward. And we have to do everything we can over the next few weeks to get it over the finish line. But this legislation shouldn't be this close. It wasn't for the activism post Sandy Hook, post Parkland. I tell people, I said, civil rights didn't start with Rosa Parks.
That's right.
Civil rights didn't start with Martin Luther King. Didn't start with SNCC. Didn't start with the March on Washington. It still hasn't over. But my point is that movements take generations, and it's unfortunate. And we wish things move faster. Think about the LGBT community. If I told you 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that we would, during Pride Month, from a societal perspective, we would be so open and honest and free to discuss inclusivity in our country as a culture. These movements take generations to see progress. So we have to continue to fight for these families. I'll talk later about how some creatives are doing it in their own way. You don't have to do it the way me and Enrique do it. You don't have to protest. You don't have to call senators, but you have to do something for our country. Enrique, when we come back, we're going to hear from one of America's great political analysts. You see this man all over television, but he's also one of the great pollsters and researchers on Latino politics, Fernand Amandi. We're going to take a quick break. We'll get some highlights of previous Found Translation episodes. We come back with our great friend, Fernand Amandi. Here's some great polling and information. And you know what? We may need to talk about the Silver State, brother, because Nevada is again going to be the center of Latino politics in 2022. So some highlights from previous shows. We'll come back with our great friend, Fernand.
Mira, I had the honor of meeting Bernie at the barbershop. We share the same barber in New York. And my barber was like, yeah, man, I know Bernie, Bernie comes by here all the time. I'm like, Bernie Williams does not come by. You crazy, man. That's Bernie Williams, man. That's 51, dog. You know Bernie Williams? That's Bernie Williams. Pasa por aquí todo rato. Bernie pasa. Wasn't Bernie here a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, man, Bernie was here. I said, you got to stop lying, man. My Bernie Williams is not going to come by this little barbershop, please. And I swear to you, in through the door comes Bernie Williams. and normally I'm picky about the cut. I'm like, get off. That's Bernie Williams. But he was so, like normal, chill. Hey, how are you, man? Hey, you busy? I'm like, Papa, I'll get off the chair right now. You can have it.
In early 2021, my mother suffered a stroke, and little did we know how much it would change our lives. I wanted nothing more than to stay home and care for her, but my family couldn't afford for me to be out of the workforce. There are millions of families in America just like mine. We need paid family medical leave. Congress, please act now.
There's great artists, and I'll just say kind of in the rap world, just for example, there's great artists that are great in the genre. Then there's special artists, the truly greats, that move the culture and move their fan base forward with them. So Bad Bunny is not just like the best in the game, but he's changing the game. Because what I think, to your point, Tanya, what this album is doing, his new music is doing, is maturing his audience. And where he's pushing us to go along on his personal journey and his artistic journey. So y'all need to catch up. And I think about like Jay-Z. Jay-Z was wearing basketball jerseys. So everybody wore basketball jerseys. Then one day Jay-Z, as my brother would share his perspectives, he's wearing, suits, and now he's a business guy and he's about flossing, and then everybody changed their game and it became like a different thing. So the truly greats, we have to move with them. Prince was that way. He was always changing. Welcome back to Found Translation, your home for Latino politics. Great to see some great quotes. Eli Castro, one of America's great Latino comedians. You'll see him on tour this summer. Had a nice moment there with a mutual hero of ours, Bernie Williams. We saw an ad from Unidos U.S. Action Fund featuring one of our great affiliate leaders out there, Angela Flores, talking about the need for paid family medical leave and many of the other health issues that we fight on day to day in our politics. And of course, my thoughts on Bad Bunny. What else is there to talk about around the dinner table? We're so happy to have a great friend to the show, one of America's great political analysts, pollsters, researchers, and a great friend of ours, Fernand Amandi. Fernand, welcome back to Found Translation, brother. Fernand, are you there? Fernand looks a little frozen there. I don't know.
Yeah, he does look frozen.
Yeah. Okay, so Fernand. Maybe, Fernand, if you could hear us, come back in. You are frozen. That is odd. He's coming back. Okay. Fernand, are you there?
Hey, I don't know what happened. I was lost in translation. Now I'm found in translation.
I'll tell you, he's always got a line, doesn't he?
That's
Fernand,
the clip.
first of all,
Right there.
We're only going to spend 10 seconds on this, but I know part of the reason you accept this invitation, and we really appreciate you coming. I know you're very busy, brother. Is that you did want to just stick it to me about the Miami Heat and the Sixers. I know, I'll give you 5 seconds to do that. And then, but we have a lot to talk about. You're doing some great polling work. Fernand, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My brother, Rafael, that I am a pollster by trade, which is I predict events that are going to happen. And you got to give me my props that I predicted another outcome that happened. I told you it was going to be my Heat and 6 over your Sixers. And it not only was the Heat and 6, it was a pretty incredible 6 where they closed it out on the Sixers home floor in your Philly. So all I can say is the better team won.
No, you're right about it. And I told you I would give you that time. And so I did. And I stayed quiet. And you're absolutely right. And, the seminal moment 3-4 years ago when Jimmy Butler said, oh, I kind of like South Beach. Forget this whole Sixer thing. Really doomed us. And so we've got some retooling to do this summer. Fernand, we wanted to bring on the show not just to keep razzing me about my Sixers, but because your ear is to the ground. You're one of the nation's top political analysts, and you're doing some incredible polling that really speaks to what's the real story with the Latino vote. Because one of the things we're going to do this cycle is really educate people about there's kind of what the national conversation is, largely with political experts and journalists that don't really understand the Latino community particularly well. But then there's the reality. And so Fernand and Enrique and I and other experts we're going to have on the show from different parts of the country are going to really talk about what's real out there. So Fernand, why don't you talk about some of the polling you've been doing and just give us sort of a 30,000-foot view of what you're seeing nationally, and then we'll take a little deeper dive into Nevada.
Sure. Well, Rafael, you and Enrique go into this all the time. That's why so many folks in the know, and especially that want to understand Latino politics, are always here on Found in Translation. But let me just, for your listeners and maybe others who may be tuning in for the first time, try and give you that 30,000-foot view, because fundamentally there is this belief in the national media that the Republicans have made inroads over the years with the Hispanic vote. And I actually believe that is true. And part of the reason for that is a lot of the work that both of you did, the great historic work in the run up to the 2008 election and then certainly the 2012 election, where Barack Obama was able to not only win election the first time, but win re-election really with strong, historically high levels of Latino support behind him. Obama got 67% of the national Hispanic vote in 2008. And then he got an unthinkable 71% in 2012. That was a moment where the Republicans kind of freaked out because they said, look, if they're getting nearly 90% of the black vote, and now they're breaking the 70 percentile range with the Hispanic vote, the fastest growing segment of the American electorate, it's going to be very tough for us to win the White House ever again, and certainly even hold on to congressional majorities. So what the Republicans did since then is understand they were never going to win the Hispanic vote, but could they start peeling away a point or two here and there over the cycles? And they've actually done a pretty decent job doing just that, which is why this notion that the Republicans have made inroads with the Hispanic vote. We certainly saw that in 2016 a little bit, despite Trump, the most anti-Latino candidate who's ever sought the presidency. And then, of course, in 2020, when in some states, even though Biden won, he didn't quite win by those types of margins that Obama and even Hillary in some states had gotten before. So I think that's what led to this belief. But to your question, what do the polls in 2022 say? Well, we looked at 3 states in particular: Arizona, as you mentioned, Nevada, and of course, your home state of Pennsylvania, to see whether that was the case or not. And what we found is that not only are the Republicans having problems, the Democrats are looking like they might even have the type of support that propelled them to win the Congress, or at least the House of Representatives, in 2018. So right now, we're still a few months away. A lot of stuff can happen. But in those 3 states, at least, the story is a good one for Democrats with Latino voters in Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania.
Armand, thank you for setting that or setting up that picture, right? And I think that's where I want to go next. I think it was really clear looking at the poll, right, that there are specific issues that Latino voters are rejecting, or I guess a narrative that they're rejecting from the Republicans, and embracing a specific narrative and issues that are near and dear to them that Republicans are promoting. What are those issues? Can you talk a little bit about that? Again, because as you said, if you listen to national prognosticators and people in politics who talk about this, they're like, oh no, Trump, he fared very well last time, and Latino voters are flocking or fleeing the Democratic Party in droves and in record numbers. But your poll obviously suggests otherwise. So I think it's really important if you could let our viewers know and listeners know, kind of what those bread and or kitchen table issues are that are really propelling Latinos towards Democratic candidates.
No question. And I don't want to be that guy, but I do want to be very clear about what we're inferring. Remember, these are 3 states only. Our intention is to look at other key states where we know the Hispanic vote plays an important role. But I think we can definitively make these conclusions from these 3 states where all of them have a contested gubernatorial race now in November. All of them are going to have a contested race for the U.S. Senate, which will determine control of the U.S. Senate this November. So I think they're a good microcosm. But to your question, what do we find? Well, first off, we do find that the issue that is the issue of greatest concern for Hispanic voters in these 3 states is what everybody else is concerned about, and that is prices, inflation, jobs, and the economy. When we gave voters the opportunity to volunteer and tell us in an open-ended manner what is the issue they're most focused on right now, over and over and over again, we hear it is about inflation, it's about jobs in the economy, it's about those kitchen table issues that you cite. What's fascinating, though, is in spite of the fact that they're citing these issues that the Republicans say is the reason they believe they will recapture the congressional majorities, Latino voters are saying they trust the Democratic approach on these issues much more so, particularly when you pair it off into what the central MAGA or Republican message is, which is to fight inflation by cutting control and getting under control government spending, the big line that they use over the years. Latinos actually kind of reject that premise. They say no, they like the government investment in infrastructure, the government investment in the economy, the government investment in trying to stimulate the American Recovery Act, which has created over 8 million jobs in less than 2 years' time. And the reason for that is Latino families specifically are benefiting from that. There's almost full employment. They have seen their wages increase because a combination of the great resignation, the availability of jobs, and how wages have risen, which still, even though inflation is a factor, their increase in wages are right now offsetting those inflationary increases. So at least on those issues, you find that despite the fact that they're saying the most important issue is the issue that Republicans want to make a referendum on these elections out, they are siding with the Democratic approach. So that's one aspect of that. There's an even more fascinating one on another one, but I'll get to that one a little bit later.
And we're here with Fernand Amandi, one of America's great pollsters and political analysts on Found Translation, my co-host Enrique Chaurand. Thank you all so much for joining us. Fernand, so let's turn to just one state. There's just so much here we're going to get into. I love this conversation. It's so important that people listen and understand what's really going on in our community. And look, activists need to learn, because the day-to-day issues that impact us and how we look at them are not the way our cousins and a lot of people in sort of the larger Latino community look at it. So there's lots here to learn, and it's all not a rosy picture, but it's very instructive to understand the facts and the reality, and that's what Fernand brings to the table here so well and explains it so well to us. So Nevada, really one of the great success stories in American politics this last, this century. A state that went from relatively little prominence in national politics. Of course, the ascendance of the now past. Really recently passed away, former Senate leader Harry Reid, who not only was a Senate leader and one of America's most prominent Democrats, but someone that really invested in the Latino community and Latino leadership and making the state just more prominent. And by doing so, Latino political power much more prominent in the Southwest and in Nevada. And when we were children, it was a red state or maybe a purplish red state. Now it's a fairly purplish, but definitely tending on the blue side with 2 U.S. senators and the governor being Democrats and the Democratic legislature there at the moment. And so the conventional thinking amongst the political elites is going to be a tough one. Cortez Masto's in trouble. And this is another example of one of these states where the Latino vote is trending Republican. In your initial analysis with the polling that you've done, Fernand, tell us what is the reality of what's going on and where's the thinking specifically of the Latino electorate in Nevada?
Well, first off, Rafael, I'm so happy that you cited the work of the late Senator Harry Reid, because the truth of the matter is, if every Democratic leader
Amen.
Approached the Hispanic vote like Senator Reid did, the Democrats would have a 60 threshold in the Senate. They would have an overwhelming advantage in the House.
Texas would be a whole different conversation.
Texas and Florida, for that matter. Texas and Florida, and we'd probably never lose the White House again in our lifetimes if every Democratic leader today took the Hispanic vote as seriously as Senator Reid.
Thank you.
I think to your point, in 2010, that was the year that the Tea Party arose. We lost our majority in the House. The only reason Democrats held on to the Senate that cycle was because of Nevada and because of Harry Reid, and specifically the Latino vote, who a lot of the national pundits didn't appreciate or understand was a vote that Harry Reid and Nevada had specifically been organizing, and they pulled him through. So I don't think enough credit can be given.
Fernand, by the way, Fernand, with another organization we used to work with, you and I together with a whole lot of other people, registered, polled, GOTV, 10,000 new Latino voters. That literally could have been the difference. I mean, that's how, that's all because of the investment that was made in Nevada historically over the last, this generation of politics.
Well, the only thing I would disagree with you, Rafael, is I would take the word literally away, because Harry Reid said that was the difference. The work that you and others in your organization did in that registration absolutely was the reason Reid held on to a seat that every national pundit, including the Democratic-leaning one, said he was going to lose. And it was because of that turnout of Hispanic voters that folks just didn't realize was there. The sleeping giant was awakened in Nevada, and it not only helped Harry Reid, like you said, we've won every presidential contest. We now have the both Senate seats there. We have the gubernatorial seat there now.
Only Latina in U.S. Senate history. So yeah,
that's exactly right. And Senator Cortez Masto. And I think that is why now, even though she clearly is in a difficult race, she's running against Adam Laxalt for that Senate seat to hold on to. A lot of folks, myself included, and the polls suggest that part of the reason she may and probably will hold on is because she continues to have rock solid support from Hispanic voters in Nevada, which are right now propping her up and keeping her in the game, and hopefully will do that in November as well.
And I know, Enrique, we're going to tee up some commentary I'm going to have. People will see next week related to some of the dynamics in Nevada and why Senator Cortez Masto, even in a very challenging political environment for Democrats, is still polling strong and has strong support with the Latino community. But part of that dynamic is that she's actually focused on the issues Latinos care about. Fernand just laid out. It's clear they're not in polling. They're not talking about cultural wedge issues. They're not talking about, the divisives of the country. They want to see elected officials, regardless of party, fighting for their economic viability and addressing this inflation issue. Now, look, on a normal cycle, and it still may play out this way, inflation, regardless of party, and some people aren't old enough to remember how these things go, but every 15, 20 years this happens, and whoever's in power gets punished. It's just a very difficult thing to message around. But part of the dynamic here is that, at the very least, Democrats are trying to address these issues. They get about the child tax credit fights. They get about some of the other ways that Democrats are proposing and have supported through COVID relief and other measures. The student loan conversation, other ways that Democrats are trying to address, prices and cost of living for working families. And the Republicans, the Adam Laxalts and some of these other Republican candidates are focused on, border issues, enforcement, criminalizing our community rhetorically, and in, the big lie, and continuing the big lie. And if we had a few of the Republican candidates win a few days ago in their primary. So they're going to be running against people that literally want to take our democracy away. So, Fernand, what other highlights are you seeing in the Nevada polling you wanted to share with us?
Well, look, you mentioned one, and I teased it earlier. I want to bring it out now. It's those cultural issues, specifically the abortion issue, because the conventional wisdom says, and it's right, by the way, it's accurate, it's data supported, that Latino voters tend to be a little bit more conservative on one of those cultural issues, which is the abortion issue. And what that means is, personally, when it comes to how they personally view the issue, you tend to see Hispanics take the more pro-life position. In other words, personally, when it comes to how they personally would deal with that issue. But what we saw in the polling, which is just fascinating to me as someone who's been looking at this issue for years, is that despite how they may personally feel, overwhelming majorities of Hispanic voters in these three states, also in Nevada, do not want to take other women's rights away to choose. We're talking 64, 65, 63%, and depending on which of these three states we looked at, want to keep the Roe versus Wade protections that will allow a woman's right to choose. So another sign, Enrique and Rafael, that the Republicans think that they may be catering to Hispanics with this issue, but in reality, it just shows how extreme and far outside the mainstream Republicans are. Not only that, but in Nevada, 40% of Hispanic voters said that they're much more likely to vote for Democrats this November strictly on this issue alone and what they see as Republican interference in doing and engaging in a role that they don't believe the government should be involved in. They think that this is an issue best left to doctors, faith practitioners, and the family of the person in question.
No question about it. And, Fernand, it's another conversation we need to have. And we need to bring on, I'm thinking about Ivan Gutierrez with Latino Victory, one of our nation's foremost Latino reproductive rights activists, the Assemblywoman in New York now, Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. So we need to have some real conversations with them on here, because I don't think what you just laid out is the truth, which is on a personal level, and I'll say for myself and my wife, that we have personal opinions about these issues. But that's different between how we feel other people should act. Fernand, I understand you have to head out. We really appreciate it. Give us a final thought that you wanted to share about the polling or anything else about sort of the Latino vote as we think about the Latino vote in 2022.
Well, this week there was kind of a big earthquake in the Hispanic vote community, because there was a race that was won by the Republicans that I think a lot of national pundits didn't think was possible. This is, of course, that seat in Texas, south the Rio Grande Valley, that was captured by the Republicans with the first Mexican-born member of Congress. But
Mayra Flores, yes.
Mayra Flores, exactly. But before there's any panic that sets in, I just want to state here on Found in Translation that I believe strongly that is just a temporary mirage for the Republicans. Yes, they won the race, and that's because they spent untold millions. I think the estimates are between $7 and $10 million. The Democrats really didn't contest the seat in that special election because their plan is to recapture it when it counts now in November.
That's right.
I think you're going to see the Democrats easily win back that seat. So yes, the Republicans can celebrate for a few months, but I don't think it does speak to a systematic change. So that's the parting thought I would leave you both with.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to kind of read the backstory. You know, the former Democratic Congressman Filomeno Vela really fumbled his retirement transition, and that's what triggered the special election, the redistricting lines. Vicente Gonzalez is already in Congress, and he's preparing again to run with the reconstituted lines in the fall. So, Fernand Amandi, thank you so much. We're going to continue to monitor the great polling you're doing, and we're here to work with you 100%. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Enrique with some more political analysis and our parting thoughts for this week on Found in Translation. Mil gracias, Fernand.
Thank you, brothers. Take care.
George Zimmerman was Latino, right?
George Zimmerman, the cop that killed Philando Castile, Minnesota, was Latino. Mm-hmm. And we have, many cases on all those California cases that we're monitoring, Sean Monterroso and other. A lot of times the Latino cops are involved. So this is sort of a battle for our soul and identity. And quite honestly, the next generation of our politics nationally is going to be this battle between Latinos that have a grounding of self and understand that the foundations of white supremacy, is some that are like, you know what? I'm going to try to grab onto some of that whiteness to try to get a step ahead. So it's really. Welcome back to Found in Translation. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had a great conversation talking about our thoughts as Latino activists as it relates to January 6th. And we need to continue to educate and just encourage our community. Just watch for yourself. Just you accept the facts. It's not hyperbolic. You don't have elected officials giving long speeches, pontificating, politicized. This is a bipartisan commission, by the way. Just understand the importance of the facts and draw your own conclusions. We spoke, of course, how we need to continue to support Uvalde and those families and how that relates to the bigger conversation around gun control and immigration policy. We celebrated the 10th year anniversary, which obviously is bittersweet to some degree, of DACA and the continued contributions that our immigrant brothers and sisters are giving to our country. We just heard from Fernand Amandi, one of the nation's great pollsters, who just gave us some insight about what's going on with the Latino community around the country, but also about the Silver State, Nevada, which is, kind of my political home out in the West Coast. Got a lot of love. I've been working on campaigns in Enrique since 2002. I did a congressional 2002 in Nevada. So, and the love affair with that state has just continued from there.
Man, you're dating yourself, Rafael. Come on, man. You're a spring chicken, brother.
I was very young, brother. I was very young out there grinding it out in 110
You were what, like 15? 16?
Something like that. But it's funny because I would knock on doors, and they were like, ¿De dónde tú eres?
Yeah.
I said, soy boricua. They said, yeah, because you don't sound like you're from here.
Well, when I would do door knocking back home too, I mean, look at me. I look like a gringo. They're like, good thing they knew my family, because a lot of times they'd be looking at me crossways, like, who's this guy? Who's this white dude knocking on my door in the barrio? So I hear you.
Well, the guy that pumps my gas in the neighborhood gas station, he's from a part of India that I think it's that southern part of India where they're more Christian. There's a part of India that was colonized by the Portuguese. Mm-hmm. So they kind of have more of a Latino flavor to them. And so he's got this look, I guess he could pass for Latino too. Uh-huh. He swears up and down I'm an Indian that's like fading the funk, that denies that I'm like a sellout. He goes, I know you're Indian. I was like, I'm Puerto Rican. What do you want what do you want, bro? I mean, anyway, it's kind of funny. Yeah. But there was a couple of things before we get into our last shout outs. And again, we want to thank Fernand for his gracious time. A lot of great information there. Mm-hmm. I did want to mention, as it relates to the Nevada piece, a couple quick things. The Republicans on some level are really shooting themselves in the foot politically. With pushing this far right wing, big lie, MAGA, not only the agenda, which is incredibly dangerous, not particularly effective in general elections, but this, but it's really sort of clouding the bigger discussion they should be having, which is being critical of the Democrats as it relates to the inflation issue and the rising costs across the board. There's lots of reasons that's happening, most of which, not all, but most of which really the president has little to do with. It's a global phenomenon, but their candidates are so wacky, so crazy, so clouded in their, so racist and so clouded in their focus, so incompetent, that they really are giving the Democrats an opportunity, and particularly with the Latino vote. So just thinking about, if you see this roster of Republicans running, the gentleman running, Adam Laxalt, running against Catherine Cortez Masto, ultra right wing, MAGA, just very unhinged guy. Joe Lombardo, the former Clark County sheriff, running against the Governor Steve Sisolak. Jim Marchand running for Secretary of State. This man wants to be, just won a primary election in Nevada. And he stated to be the Secretary of State, the person that oversees the election system in the state. And he said, our vote hasn't counted in decades here. And by the way, he's running against an incredibly competent Latino businessman, philanthropist named Francisco Cisco Aguilar, who's going to come on the show, who we on a personal level support 1,000%. So that's going to be one of the races we have to monitor closely. So we're seeing it coast to coast. The clown show in Pennsylvania, I mean, between Dr. Oz, the senatorial candidate, and Doug Mastriano, who's incredibly dangerous. He wants a theological state. He wants Sharia law in this country, basically. And on the gubernatorial side, and the relatively strong Democratic candidates we have around the country, like Cortez, Masto, and the Pennsylvania folks, could sort of even out the scales and provide Democrats more opportunity than maybe in a normal cycle, because inflation is just a political killer. It just, it never goes well. Enrique, before we get to our shout out segment, any other thoughts about the conversations we've had so far?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I appreciate your, kind of your analysis there with the Republicans, right? That they continue to shoot themselves in the foot. Weren't they the party of message discipline? Haven't they always been traditionally the party of message discipline?
They're disciplined now. They just have the wrong message.
Well, but I mean, yes, correct. They're disciplined now, but the wrong, but also disciplined within their ranks, right? They would only really put people on who fit a very specific mold, right? There was a playbook for many years that this is the kind of candidate we're going to get behind, right? They typically themselves would weed out these kinds of crazy conspiracy theorist folks. They would never have a chance. Even if they got on the ballot, they were never, ever a serious candidate. Now it seems like you have to be all in on MAGA to even be considered, right? And
they've lost, Enrique, they've lost control.
Well,
the establishment has lost control.
They have absolutely lost control, but they've also lost their spine. I think that's part of it as well.
No question.
Right? I mean, the January 6th hearing is playing this out. I mean, look at the 4 years of the Trump administration. How many, we could play clips of these folks when Trump was a candidate, right? Everyone from Cruz to Rubio.
Lindsey Graham, remember?
Lindsey Graham.
This guy's crazy.
Oh my gosh, Lindsey Graham.
Chris Christie.
Now they worship at the altar of Trump. So yes, he's another one.
McCarthy, unbelievable. Yeah, and it's interesting because and when we do see a few examples of people that can thread that needle, they're doing fairly well. Thinking about the Georgia candidates, Kemp.
That's right.
And the Secretary of State candidate Raffensperger. Nobody had more the ire of Trump than that gentleman. Thank God he won that primary.
And overwhelmingly wasn't even close. It wasn't even close, right?
That's right.
Overwhelmingly.
That's right.
The last thing I will
Georgia could be an outlier too, so we'll see.
No, that's true. Yeah, we will. But Fernand was awesome. If you get an opportunity to look at the poll, I want to preview a blog that we're going to be putting out, that Rafael is putting out around the poll itself. So we'll make sure to share it with everybody there. We will have a link to the poll, right? So you can see how it breaks down in those 3 particular states, and you will see for yourself, right? Kind of the questions that were asked and the sentiments of Latino voters. And I think, again, that's why I wanted to ask that question, because it was very, very eye-opening. And I appreciated what he said about Roe v. Wade. Right, and those cultural kinds of issues and how Latinos are looking at that. Very interesting.
That's right. And I do want to say, before we get into the last few pieces here, I do want to say, I don't want anyone to take away from this idea that I'm trying to minimize this inflation situation. There's a bad problem. There's a bad problem. And, the Fed has a role in it. You can argue, we had 3 relief packages, 2 under Trump, 1 under Biden. Could you say the last one was overkill? Could you say they could have been done leaner? You could make all those arguments. But the question that all of us, Latino voters and Latino advocates, should be asking both the Democrats and Republicans, what is your plan to deal with it? So it's not enough for the Republicans to say, oh, look what the Democrats did. They need to be held responsible to come up. If they're trying to earn your vote, not just on cultural issues, not because they're dividing us, trying to divide us on wedge social issues. What is their plan to address these problems around the rising costs of everything? And so, they need to earn your vote and not just be the party of, well, look at what the Democrats are doing. When in fact, 2 of the 3 relief packages were done under the Trump administration. I will say the last thing on Nevada is that one of the most interesting political factoids about American politics to me is Adam Laxalt, this weaselly Republican candidate running for Senate, and that his father, he didn't find this out till a few years ago. He was actually the love child of former Democratic New Mexico Senator Pete Domenici.
Oh boy.
Who had a child with one of his coworkers daughters who's 30 years younger. I mean, if Pete Domenici's not was one of the big slime balls in the history of U.S. politics, can you imagine he had a coworker that hooked up one of your daughters? I mean, I just can't understand. Like, it's just one of the most incredible things that overshadows Nevada politics.
It's like a telenovela, right? You can't make this stuff up.
It's unbelievable.
You can't make this stuff up.
Enrique, give us a couple final shout outs before we wrap it up.
Yeah, really quickly. I know you all have heard me talk about a band making movies. My brother Juan Carlos is one of the founding members. They are now in their 10th year and doing some wonderful things. They're a Latino rock band, and they just played in Mexico. They're going back to Monterrey, Mexico, but they were in Mexico City earlier this year. We're on the same stage with Residente. For those who follow Residente and know that name, their new album Porcelina is coming out. Check them out, Making Movies Band. They're out of my hometown of Kansas City. You can find them on YouTube, of course, Spotify, anything like that. So, if you don't know about them, check them out. Hopefully you become a fan. If you do know about them, I'm sure you already are looking forward to the next album. So I just want to shout them out. They're doing some great work, and they're also activists. They do a lot of great work in the community. They're out there working on behalf of candidates too, but they run a really great nonprofit where they give kids in the inner city an opportunity to learn about music. They give them music lessons, vocal lessons. They also help these young people record their music. So whether you want to do traditional rock, you want to do love ballads, you want to rap, whatever, these guys also take time to give back to the community. Really proud of them.
It was so great. Even before I knew they're your family, I saw them perform at Unidos conference a year. And I remember going up to them saying, you remind me, you guys are fantastic. It was some between, I said, you guys, I feel Ozomatli, I feel Maná, I feel Ruben Blades, I feel, thinking about during that time period, some of the rock en español groups coming out of Puerto Rico, La Fiela La Vega, Puya, and some of those groups that I followed at that time. And they were like, it's so funny you say that because all those people are influences of ours. And we just came back from Puerto Rico and we're jamming with some of those same people. So there's really a great connection. They blend a lot of great sounds. And they're just an excellent band. So I encourage people to follow and support Making Movies. We'll have them on the show at some point during the cycle. But it was good because I wasn't influenced. I actually liked them and then found out they're your family. So those guys are really cool. I wanted to I'm not much of a Netflix guy, I'll be honest with you, because I follow, sports, and I'm on social media. My buddies talk about politics and pop culture. So I don't watch a ton of Netflix, but I do want to recommend two movies. One's a documentary, actually. One is Hustle, which is more on my sports side. It's Adam Sandler's new basketball movie. And I want to co-sign on it because, I grew up, one of the things, basketball and sports is such a big part of my culture. Sort of, and basketball really is at the fusion along with boxing and baseball of kind of my Puerto Rican sports culture and my North Philly culture. And so, it's so authentic, so raw. There's some great, moments in the movie from like the urban basketball scenes in Spain, which I think are really cool and really raw and really authentic and really interesting. Of course, Philadelphia, my hometown, is sort of the centerpiece of it and sort of our local basketball culture. So really encourage people to watch it. Shout out to a great friend of ours, Aaron McKee, who made a cameo in the movie. So that was extra special for us. But I really want to make sure we shout out Jennifer Lopez's new documentary on Netflix, Halftime, which my wife and I watched last night. And so it chronicles sort of her journey putting together the Super Bowl halftime show from a few years ago. And so what's interesting about it is that it's actually less about the Super Bowl performance and more about her personal journey, her midlife, where she's at a midlife, someone in early 50s, who's been in the public eye and is one of the most probably the most celebrated Latina in our lifetimes globally. But that she was very candid about her life's ups and downs and the pressures and the depression and the things we go through. Doesn't matter how successful we are, but we go through things as it relates to families, as it relates to relationships, and taking criticism and just the things she's gone through to be this seminal icon. So I encourage people to watch it because I must say, if you're not a big fan of hers, I think you'll become more of a fan of hers because she's very candid. And then from a political perspective, that she talked about how her vision of trying to figure out as someone that she admits is not particularly political, not really comfortable with politics. At the time she's dipped it in the past hasn't really gone too well for her, but that she really felt strongly that she had to use this platform to send a message in a way that fit her art and her creativity, and obviously performing with an immigrant woman, Shakira, Colombiana, also added to that. And then this process of how she developed the concept of having the children sing in those cages, if people recall, and her daughter being the lead singer during that moment of the show. Mm-hmm. And so I thought very thoughtful, and I think instructive for people that who may be watching this. Say, I like you guys know what you're talking about. I'm not really into politics. I don't know how to get involved. I don't want to be too political. I don't want to do it, you know. And it showed that as a creative person and someone just isn't political, but felt like they had to make a statement in how she thoughtfully did it in her own way. And so through her art. So I just encourage people to watch Halftime, J-Lo's documentary, for lots of reasons. I thought it was very well done and very interesting. And I want to thank everyone for watching this week's edition of Found Translation. Again, thank you for your support of me during my health recovery. And Enrique, I appreciate you, brother. It's like we're riding a bike. It's like we never left.
I'm trying to follow in your shoes. I'm little by little, I'm trying to get better, but thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's so good to have you back, Rafael. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining Found in Translation today. You can check us out on YouTube as well, and continue to join us every week as we bring national politics to the barrio and hear from national leaders on issues impacting nuestra comunidad. Hasta pronto.
Have a great weekend.